All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Now, before we get started with today's video, just a few items of housekeeping to go through. So if you are a member of my Telegram channel, then you might know that last year was a bit of a difficult one for me, as I'm sure it was for many people. In my case, I lost my job as a teacher. There are a few reasons, mostly because I refused to spend all day working while wearing a mask, and I refused to force such a thing on my students as well, and I made it clear that I would not be getting any injections. So the long and short of it is, I've got a lot more free time on my hands these days, but also a lot less certainty. Now, it may sound like a cliche, but it is true that a crisis can bring about an opportunity, and necessity is the mother of invention. So on that note, I have decided to rededicate myself to my content creator online persona. So what that means is I'm going to be making a lot more videos, and I'm also going to be making other kinds of content. So for example, I've already set up a Substack page where I'll be posting long form essays and articles about various topics. And all this is to say that this is probably going to become like my full-time job. So that means that I'm also introducing monetization. So I've already mentioned the Substack that has a paid subscriber option. I'm setting up a Subscribe Star, so there'll be some content there where people can pay to subscribe and get access to that content. And then I'll be setting up ways to make donations if you're so inclined to do so. So there'll be various ways to make a contribution to Pax Populi. And I've never really thought of doing this in the past because these videos have never really cost me any more than my time. But in order for me to improve the quality of the videos, and in order for the scope of the videos to broaden, and in order to do the other content like the Substack, well, that requires more than just time. And that's where all of you come in with your financial contributions. And honestly, I've got a lot of big ideas that I would love to make real. So any contribution will help. And thank you very much. So let's get started now with today's video. And we are going to be talking about this book right here, The Ancient Ethnostate. Ethnostate. By Guillaume Durocher. And wow, this is probably one of the best books I have read in a long time. If you're in my Telegram chat, you know that I've been speaking the praises of this book and basically declaring it essential reading. And even if you're on the YouTube channel here, get this book, because I'm sure I'm going to be referencing this book many times in the future. But rather than doing a sort of book review and talking about the book's qualities and what I liked about it, and there is a lot to like. I mean, the foreword is written by the great Kevin MacDonald, and that alone is worth buying the book in and of itself. So there's a lot to like, and the book is very well written. I highly recommend it. And that's really all I've got to say about the book's qualities. So instead of just leaving it there, I thought I would take a bit of a deeper dive, as it were, into some of the ideas that are presented in this book, because it's not a surprise to me, because I've long known this and long believed this, but I think that there is a lot of relevant wisdom in the ancients that is useful for us today. And so let's talk first about how the ancient ethnostate, how how Durocher opens the book. So there's the foreword by the great Kevin MacDonald, and then there's some introductory chapters. But the book really begins with the Iliad. And it begins with the Iliad as the foundational myth for the ancient Greeks and really for Europe. Durocher mentions that Dominique Venner once said that the Iliad is basically the European Bible. And after reading the ancient Ethnostate, I have to say I totally agree. And so let's look at some of the fundamental principles that Homer presents in the Iliad and how Durocher analyzes them. And Durocher gives us this concept called vital barbarism. And it's basically the idea that civilization rises because of savagery. First, you must have this vital barbarism in order to even have a civilization. And to triumph requires brutality. You cannot separate these things. And then, on the other hand, there is this decadence in civilization that's totally, it's totally contrary to vital barbarism. It's this idea of a decadent civilization, and decadence is something that should be averted and resisted, or else you will suffer dire consequences, as Homer illustrates in the Iliad, because the vital barbarism is represented by the Achaeans or the Greeks, and the decadent civilization is Troy. And although Troy holds out pretty well for quite some time, in the end, they can't resist the Greeks. And basically, Troy was too affluent and too effeminate to resist. And there really is no solution to this problem. This is a natural cycle of civilization. There is no solution, for example, to our present day lack of vital barbarism and our present day excess of decadent civilization. It reminds me of what Julius Evola said about similar things in Riding the Tiger. So I'm going to read what he had to say because I think it's relevant. So Evola said, quote, "When a cycle of civilization is reaching its end, it's difficult to achieve anything by resisting it and by directly opposing the forces in motion. One should not become fixated on the present and on things at hand, but keep in view the conditions that may come about in the future. Thus, the principle to follow could be that of letting the forces and the processes of this epoch take their own course, while keeping oneself firm and ready to intervene when the tiger, which cannot leap on the person riding it, is tired of running." Now, I mention all this because we often stress ourselves out by asking, what's the solution? What's your solution? What do you propose we do? What can we do? And when it comes to something like this, something as fundamental as this vital barbarism and its necessity to have a civilization, or the other fundamental, the decadence that we must strive to avoid, but which is seemingly inevitable, well, in those cases, there is no solution. And that's not blackpilling, and that's not doom-mongering. It's just a natural fact. This is the natural way of things. Because only external pressures are the solution. only external pressures which will awaken the dormant manliness, the dormant vigor, the dormant barbarism in Western man today is what will be required. Only external forces can do this. Only these evolutionary pressures that shake us up and force us to adapt, to strengthen, or to be eliminated. It's the meme of hard times make good men. And the hard times will come. Maybe you could say they're already here. I would say we're not anywhere near real hard times yet. And men will either rise to the occasion or they will fall by the wayside, and the cycle will continue. And that's the solution. And there's really nothing we can do about it, except, as Evola said, write it out. Write it out and try to be in a state of good standing so that, if we can intervene when the moment is right, and also we can just survive these bad times and even thrive, perhaps. But I understand that this is a huge question. It's a huge issue, especially when we talk about things like spurgery, incels, the Zoomers. It's a huge issue because we have to live in this time as well. And as we are unfortunate enough to live in the decadent civilization phase of the cycle, every generation that's born into that cycle will be tainted, as we all have been. And so we do have a lot of problems to deal with in this present day, but we also need to think on the conditions of the future. And so while we can't solve the problem of weak men, decadent, effeminate men, the lack of vital barbarism, while we can't solve the problem of all these spurgs and all these incels, and these are things that are really quite out of our control, what we can do is at least look to the ancients, look to their wisdom, understand some natural facts, and try to implement them amongst ourselves as best as possible. And amongst ourselves, try to apply, invent even, some external pressures, some evolutionary pressures that will force the people in our little Cosa Nostra or in our tribe, will force them to rise above these maladaptive, decadent tendencies like spurgery and being an incel and all this sort of thing. But ultimately, it's not going to go away. This will be the dominant culture until eventual total collapse, or in the case of something like the Iliad, a more vitally barbaric force encounters us, and then we're in big trouble. But this is the way of nature, and I really do think that our solution is just to be in a good of a place as possible so that we survive these things, and amongst ourselves try to improve as men and women. And so that's the first fundamental truth found in the Iliad. But then there's a second one that I also think is worth talking about, because again, it's so relevant to current year. It's so relevant to our times. And this is the fundamental principle of being united and disciplined versus being, one could even say, multicultural and undisciplined. And again, these two characteristics are represented by the warring factions. The Achaeans, the Greeks, are united and disciplined, in huge contrast to the undisciplined Trojans. Like I said, they hold out for a long time, and certainly they have a hero leader like Hector, who is just as much a hero archetype as Achilles, but he isn't really the best representative of the Trojans in the story. Troy is more like Paris, selfish, effeminate, can't control his impulses. And it might be a bit of a stretch to say that the Trojans are multicultural. Certainly it would be a stretch to say they're multiracial. But Homer does describe them as speaking 1,000 tongues. And they are described as being very undisciplined. They've got all these different commanders barking out orders in different languages, and the soldiers respond in their different languages, and no one really knows what they're doing. And that's in huge contrast to the cold, deadly silence of the marching Greeks that just, they know what to do. They speak the same language. They are so disciplined that they can even march in silence. And then, as Durocher analyzes, the two factions are driven by different motivations. So the Greeks are driven by conquest, obviously, but they're also driven by honor and glory, giving glory to their family name. So the sense of unity mixed with this sense of conquest, but then also the kinship, the identity that we're doing this for bringing honor to a united people, the Greeks, the Achaeans, and I want to bring honor to my family, and my family forms part of this Greek civilization that we feel unites us. And there's many examples of where the main characters of the Greek army will spur their comrades on by appealing to things like honor and ethno-unity. And then, in comparison, we have Troy and Troy's mercenary soldiers. Now, they are driven by survival, which, let's be honest, is a pretty strong motivating factor. But mainly, they are motivated by their salary and just getting paid for doing what they do. And only the native Trojan soldiers are truly driven by a desire to protect their families and their fatherland. But they don't make up the majority of the Trojan fighting force. And that's a huge problem. Like I said, we all know how the story ends. And yes, the Trojans perform heroically and the siege of Troy lasts many years, but they don't win out in the end. They lose everything. They are basically wiped out. And this has obvious foreshadowing. And it's an obvious warning for us. What is the dominating culture of our society? What is the mantra of current year? Diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. And when you look through history, especially if you go really far back, and I love ancient history, and I love looking at ancient history, and just it's so crazy how we have come to be so far removed from basic natural truths that were so well understood during thousands of years. How is it that we've gotten to the point where now we are even saying something so incomprehensibly false for an ancient Greek? Diversity is our strength. No, unity is your strength. Discipline is your strength. This diversity is a weakness. It's a huge weakness, and it was for Troy. So that, again, I think is just another fundamental lesson to be learned in the Iliad, and Durocher does a great job of analyzing it and explaining it, and he writes very eloquently about it. So then, after a few passages on the importance of the Iliad as a sort of foundational story with some timeless, natural truths, inescapably natural truths, we then move on to Homer's other famous work, which is the Odyssey. And this too has some fundamental principles which are also hugely relevant and hugely applicable for us today. But again, they are things that are not really in our hands. We have to apply these fundamentals to ourselves and perhaps to our close friends and family, our kin, right? And apply them in our little, maybe, I guess you could call it the dissident right sphere, hold each other accountable to these standards that that our ancient ancestors have demonstrated for us. And so the fundamental principle, according to Durocher, one of them at least, in the Odyssey is the father figure as king, the patriarch. And Durocher writes a lot about the Odyssey just has this prevalence of lineage, the importance of lineage, of the importance of kin, of honoring one's family and one's ancestors. And there's a prevailing sense of duty to your kin, to your family, to your father. And then, on the other hand, the king, the patriarch, he also has a duty and a responsibility to serve and protect the interests of his kin, of his people. And Durocher points out that Ithaca, the kingdom of Odysseus, descends into dystopia while Odysseus is away fighting in the Trojan War. The country is racked by parasites and usurpers, and all of this this decay and destruction is happening. Ithaca is just ravaged during the absence of its father figure king, its patriarch. But the good people of Ithaca, Odysseus, his wife, Penelope, his son, Telemachus, what keeps them motivated, what keeps them on the good path is that sense of duty to kin, duty to the ancestors, duty to family, responsibility. And so, for example, it's what prevents Penelope from succumbing to all of her suitors. And it's what drives Telemachus to go forth and find his father and bring him back and drive out the parasites and the usurpers. And so these are, again, really fundamental themes that are severely lacking in our society, in our decadent civilization, that we cannot control. We cannot stop this. But all we can do is, again, going back to what Evelyn said, all we can do is try to ride the tiger and think about the conditions of the future, and put ourselves in a standing of being firm and ready to intervene when the time comes. And I think these are excellent values to live by and to hold each other to as we think about, the future. What do we want the next generation, the Zoomers that are coming in? Do we really want a movement full of snarky, ironic Zoomers, or do we want to hold people to a higher standard? Well, what standards? Here they are. And it's pretty bad going as far as these standards go. We have a profound lack of them. Talking about the patriarch and the importance of the patriarch and the patriarchy. Our modern society hates the patriarchy. Our modern society wages war against the patriarchy. The patriarchy is as much of a boogeyman today as white supremacy. So these are incurable problems. the rot is really bad, and we can address these problems and point them out, but we don't have the power to remedy this. We can only apply it to ourselves and try to apply it to as many people around us and live by these standards in the hopes of being healthy and ready to intervene, and also in the hopes of preparing for the future, for future conditions. So it struck me as I was reading about Durocher's analysis of the Odyssey and this fundamental element, the importance of family, the importance of the patriarch, the importance of ancestors. And it's something that's always struck me, especially when I think about ancient history and ancient religions and how important ancestors were, and how unfortunate we are to live in this modern world. Because nowadays, instead of having a strong sense of kinship and family duty and honor for our ancestors, we are atomized. Our society is anti-family in many ways. And many of us, many people in general, we don't really know our ancestors. If you go farther back than your great-grandparents, we don't really know who our ancestors were, what they did, how to honor them, how to be. We don't get inspiration from them. We don't know their story, and that's a great shame, because I do think, as Durocher points out, if you read the Iliad, if you read the Odyssey, if you have even just a slight understanding of ancient history, of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancestry is so important, and it's something I think we are really lacking. We don't understand just how important it is. So as a societal problem, these are beyond solutions, but as principles that we can live by and uphold, I think they are essential. So to conclude this first part of the ancient ethnostate, I think whenever possible we should embrace external pressure and even invent it. So that means, like, you could do things by hand instead of using power tools or electric domestic appliances. Like, even cooking homemade from scratch with as little electric domestic appliance assistance as possible. And this is something that I've been doing probably since I moved out of my parents' house. I've always wanted to do it this way. I wanted to learn, how do you make this stuff by hand, by yourself? What is it actually goes into making this? And not only is it healthier, because you're choosing the ingredients and nothing is ready-made, nothing's got, preservatives or whatever, but you also get an appreciation of just how much effort has to go into this. And, it's usually worth it, to be honest. So that's one thing, making things by hand, carpentry by hand, building things by hand, using old-fashioned tools instead of, the newfangled, high-powered electrical tools, just to get that external pressure and that evolutionary pressure that forces you to adapt and think and rise to challenges. Another way to do it would be working out, putting your body under stress, going to the gym, getting stronger. This is beneficial not just for men but for women, but I think it's highly beneficial for men. And you train yourself and you learn discipline, and some days you don't want to wake up and you don't want to wake up early and hit the gym, you want to just stay in, but you learn the discipline and you get up. And that was another one of the big difficulties of the past year, was the fact that the gym, which is like my sanctuary, was pretty much off limits for me, because if you don't have your mask on, or if you don't show your proof of vaccination QR code now, you can't go in. So And you try, training at home. And that's another thing that I actually hope to make videos about is home training. Because I've got a few months of experience now that I could share with you all. But it is difficult, and it's not the motivation that's difficult, it's the discipline. That fundamental value that we learn in the Iliad, discipline. And, even practicing a martial art is another one. Of course, there are a million reasons why knowing a martial art is beneficial, but, it's not very likely that you're ever going to have to apply anything that you learn in a martial arts course. But it's the invented external pressure. You're looking for external pressure. You're looking for evolutionary pressure, something that's going to toughen you up, sharpen your wits. You're going to learn new skills, and you will also get a lot more confidence. I think this is highly beneficial, and it's something that, the incels and the spurgs and the younger generations, we should be encouraging them to take up these things. There's no downside. But I think this is the only way you're going to solve things like spurgery and incels and effeminate behavior, bitchy behavior, all that stuff, and I've talked about this. This has been a theme now in several of my videos. We don't have the ability to control what Amazon is pumping out, what Netflix is pumping out, but we do have the ability to hold each other to a higher standard and to point out bad behavior and try and solve it amongst ourselves and in our own lives. And I think that the European Bible, the Iliad, as Durocher points out, as Dominique Venaire pointed out, is a great place to start. Okay, and then the values found in the Odyssey. Acting with honor, showing respect in order to receive it, controlling impulsive behavior, controlling emotional behavior. Think of Odysseus resisting the sirens and resisting so many temptations along the way, temptations that all of his crew at some point or another succumb to, and they all die because of it. Only Odysseus survives in the end because he resisted the temptations, he resisted his impulses. And then, of course, the other overriding themes of respecting your kin, your duty to your kin, your duty to your ancestors. I think that is another applicable and fundamental standard that we can implement in our own lives and amongst ourselves. And then also accepting the brutality and the harshness of life without complaining or asking what you've done to deserve it. Now, I'll be making a lot of content about religion in the coming months, days and months. And I think there's a lot to go over here. But accepting the brutality and the harshness of life without complaining or asking what you've done to deserve it. I think there is an element of some religions where we've been taught that if you do this, you get punished, and if you do this, you get rewarded, and if but if we learn in the Iliad that it's not so. And for example, when Hector goes out to fight Achilles, he even says, I accept that I'm probably going to die because the god of war is impartial and he deals out death to everyone. And then even Achilles accepts his fate. He knows that this war with Troy is going to be his doom, but he accepts his fate anyway. It's not a question of, what did I do to deserve this? It's just, sort of keep calm and carry on. Just get on with it. And so I think a lot of us can learn from that. It's sort of like, getting into a bit of Greco-Roman Stoicism. So that's another thing I think that is definitely a useful nugget of wisdom that we can get from the ancients. And I'm very thankful for this well-written book that sort of expounds upon all this and clarifies it in such a good way. And then finally, another useful, applicable solution to seemingly insoluble problems is that we have to unite and protect our kin. And we'll be getting into this in part 2, so get ready for that. You'll have to watch part 2 for a deeper analysis of this. But the Iliad, especially, and then ancient Greek city-state civilization in general, were not unfamiliar with the idea of unifying, even though they were disparate city-states, and the contrast between a Sparta and Athens. But they understood that they had more in common than not, and that was enough to unite them on many occasions. And you sort of had this pan-Hellenistic unity at various moments in history, various crucial moments in history. And I think that is something I've spoken about pretty much since day one, that yes, we are all different and we truly are diverse. And we have a diversity that I love celebrating, a true diversity. But we also have to understand that, we have an existential threat. The Persians are coming for us. And basically, we're all the Greeks now. And so we have to unite and be disciplined and unite with our kin. Understand that we are kin. We have more in common than not. And it should be enough to unite us. And but we'll be getting into that in part 2. So if you want to hear more about that, stay tuned. All right, so I think that is enough for this episode, and I will see you all next time. Take care.